that I had aren't going to follow through with because they've already been explored by Marvel. But yeah, the first thing that I thought was either you're going to see a female version of Loki or you're going to see an offspring of his because you see so many of those in Norse mythology in the.
That's a good point. It's a good point. And Rosine saying about the Mephisto reference in the church, I actually think that was and you some people may perceive that as a Mephisto reference when she says, the devil was the one that was here. But in Norse mythology, as you said, and sometimes in the comics, Loki is actually shown as the devil as well. And you can see, when he wears his crown has the horns very similar to what the devil looks like. So
Well,
although
and it was 16th century France, and so
correct. Right.
Yeah.
that just historically makes sense for them to assume it was the devil.
Right.
And the Hulu series Hellstrom. Did either one of y'all watch that?
No.
No.
I heard it was good though, but I didn't see it.
In the Marvel comics, Hellstrom is Loki's son, known as the son of Satan. That's why I was thinking at first it could have been Hellstrom, but because they already explored it, it didn't seem like that they would go that route. But that's what I thought. It could have been some type of version of Loki that they name as Hellstrom because they do have a basis in the comics where Loki is the literal parent. His literal offspring is known as the son of Satan, known as Hellstrom.
Yeah, Rosine, to your point of when Mobius said the variant we're hunting is you, and I didn't know about Loki being able to change shape or gender or whatever. I'm not I take what the films and the shows have given at almost pretty much face value, because I'm just not as familiar with the facts. But um, to me, that was kind of that play of he's going to have to figure out how much he can trust himself, because if this monster or horrible thing that they're supposed to be hunting and fighting is himself, that kind of goes back into him watching his timeline and asking well, what was I capable of if this is how my life ends, versus what I want and what I'm doing now, and then who is this other version of me? Because at some point they all have an origin in the same brain, soul, whatever kind of mystical center to all of those things, to each version of Loki in any of the timelines in the multiverse. So whether it has to do with it being Lady Loki or not, I think that still is just going to be part of the journey that Loki goes on through the series of trying to figure out which of choices that he has to make and whether they're ones that he feels like he can trust other people, if he can trust himself, back and forth through all of that as he's fighting himself and fighting a different literal physical version of himself and fighting within himself.
Well, and it's so fascinating because Marvel has already played with this idea of grief, right? With Wanda, right? And they worked about duty and honor and everything else when they're talking about Captain America or Falcon and Winter Soldier and whatnot, and dealing with pain and accepting kind of who you are and accepting loss and I guess the things that you've done in the past and kind of letting those things go. And now they're looking at someone who needs to find themselves, right, and be okay with who they are and accept them for themselves. And so they're really they're playing around with this stuff quite a bit, which I think is really interesting, that they're not just, it's a lot more than just surface stuff. It's really kind of getting down deep into real character flaws and issues that we deal with in the real world. And having these shows kind of allows them to do that because they have more time, and I think this could be an opportunity for them to be a very introspective show for them, and we can kind of live that through his eyes.
Well, and the other thing, if we're going to talk, they did it in Falcon and Winter Soldier. They approached and thoroughly, looked into parts of society when it came to racial themes and things like that with Falcon and Winter Soldier. And we are now in an era, when it comes to transgender individuals, folks who are making decisions to make, big life decisions where, they change who they are. And Disney has shown and Marvel has shown that they want to incorporate more of that into these things, more of that into, they want to show that they are not just, ignoring social aspects and themes and such like that. And I think that that's something else that you'll see from this show, the struggle of figuring out who you truly are. And maybe it is a vast difference. Who you are most proud to be or who you're most comfortable being is vastly different than who you once thought you were most proud being. Rick Riordan is a big guy when it comes to writing about mythology and things like that. And he wrote a trilogy called Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard. And one of the main characters in that show was a gender fluid character that the individual did not have the ability based off her emotions that he was perceived as a him and perceived as a her. And there are several beings like that in Norse mythology that come from Loki. So I think that that's what they're kind of following. But I think it also is an added positive from it is that you're going to have folks be able to relate to that based off what they're going through in their lives. And I think that kind of like you saw in Falcon and Winter Soldier, in kind of an indirect way, they're going to explore that journey that, resonates with people more and more today from the public eye. So I think that that's another, benefit, added theme, really discovery journey that we'll see from this.
That's a great point. It really is a great point. And like you said, they are not afraid to go there. They've shown the fact that they're not afraid to tackle those big, hard issues that a lot of people, have a lot of issues with, right? And I think that that's good. I think it's really good for them to be able to do that. Frankly, I think it's important that they're able to do that. And, a large company like Disney doesn't always do things like that, right? Because they're worried about the bottom line and they're worried about, what Jordan's saying, Republicans buy shoes too. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just interesting when, when they're willing to make a decision like that and kind of say, you know what, we don't really care what anyone thinks about it. We need to talk about it because it's going on, And so I do think that, I like to see that from them. So I'm happy to see that. But I think really the interesting thing about this show is that, as we've said a few times, like it could just go anywhere, right? And I think the other part of it too is that you see how powerful the TVA is, right? I thought one of the funniest parts was, with the Infinity Stones and they're, oh yeah, some of the guys use them as paperweights. Like it's just like they don't even know, and those guys are obviously right. They grow up down there, right? He doesn't know what a fish is. Someone mentioned that in the chat. Like he doesn't even know what a fish is, right? He'd never seen a fish because he's been behind desk his whole life. Like they grew up there, they were born there, they were created there, and they just are there. And so like they don't know anything else, right? And if you again on the Screencrest video, like they were saying, if you stop it, there's like medals, there's some poker chips, and there's a Honus Wagner baseball card, which is like insanely valuable. So and they do make say at the end, like, it's probably some treasure hunter or whatever that discovered a time machine. And so like, similar to what, Biff does in Back to the Future, or that might be Back to the Future too. But either way, when he goes back in time to try to, to gamble and win things. And so I thought that was kind of just a nice little touch. And, Marvel loves to do those little things anyway. So, but the Infinity Stone stuff for me was interesting. And, and look, man, like that to me was so fascinating. Like the Infinity Stones. And I think he kind of realized like, I am way out of my depth here. Like if Infinity Stones don't matter here, like, oh boy, this is bad, So, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, to watch him realize that he was out of his league for like the first time in his life was that, I mean, that was the moment of like humility that I think a lot of people were waiting in the films for him to have, which he did, but they were fleeting and their effects were fleeting. Um, when it comes to having a conversation about gender identity and sex within this series, I might be a little bit more cynical than what you were saying, Sean, about the possibility of getting into those conversations in this show. Um, I think I want to be proven wrong, but I don't. I have a lot of doubt that that's the direction Disney would allow it to take. But
That's fair.
yeah,
That's a very fair point, and they may not directly do it, but Marvel is also always so what am I trying to say, intentful with what they do. So even if they don't directly mention it or don't directly show what they're trying to do, they'll know that with what the conversations that'll start, that's the point of it. So that may be some area they're looking to skirt. But Pat, and Emily, I'll say this: one of the things that I'm excited about is, we're talking about the time travel. A couple of questions that arose for me are, what does this have to do with the Time Stone? Since obviously that is one of the Infinity Stones, but also it's not just that. You also got a couple of references. It's not just the timeline and time travel; it's the timeline resulting in multiverses. There was that scene, and Pat, if you're going to get to this, I'll get to you. I think you know what scene I'm talking about, Pat. When they come away from Ravina, and Mobius mentions another department of the TVA that they may not want to.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. A little nightmare. And I mean, and again, so we're talking about bad guys, right? And who the next big bad, and it could be King the Conqueror, and it could be Nightmare. And so, it's going to be really fascinating to kind of see where this all goes. And we know that the multiverse is coming, right? The multiverse of madness is a Doctor Strange, like Spider-Man 3, it seems like there's going to be some sort of multiverse thing going on. So, like, the multiverse is definitely coming, and we assume that it's coming from here, from Loki, right? And so, is Nightmare going to come from there, or is Kang going to come from there? Like, what's going to happen? Are the mutants going to come from there? So, like, there's all these different things that we don't know the answers to. It's just so fascinating, and again, the thing about it is that with the different variants, it could go on forever, right? Like, and Juan said it in the chat, like, you could just, I mean, it just goes on forever, right? You could have 100 Lokis, right, running around and doing all sorts of different things, and then it's like who's who, and we don't know who's what, and everything else, and it's Agents of Shield got into a little bit. I can't remember what it is, but like essentially clones, right? But like robot clones that look like humans that don't even know that they're not human. And I forget what they
oh,
call
like
them.
the droids or whatever.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
forget they had
I
like a
forget the
word
word that they
form,
use for it.
like
Yeah.
MDAs or DMAs or
Oh
so.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like I don't
yeah,
remember what
yeah,
it was, but
yeah. They had an acronym for it.
yeah, and so it's like you could see something like that, but it's like there again, there's so much to pull out of it, and then it's like, okay, you could go in a million different directions. So the question is, which direction are you going to go in, right? Obviously, the source material is there. People have read the source material, so they know the source material. So then it's like, okay, we have this source material. Now, what are we going to do with it, right? How are we going to use it and manipulate it? And again, like, I mean, I just think it's really cool. And again, if he kind of turns into this good guy, I, okay, he's not going to put it this way. I don't think Loki's going to ever be truly 100% a good guy. But I do think that he is going to kind of fight with the TVA, right? Alongside the TVA is what I should say, to try to stop these variants from doing what they're doing. And I think that that's kind of where we're headed.
But
But I
right, because I mean, you can tell he's doing that a little bit because he knows it is also in his best interest, and he's always looking out for what's in his best interest.
Exactly. Well, because they're going to have to destroy him eventually, right? Like as long as he